The lost gospel of the Hebrews, the resurrection story hidden from modern Bibles. But that's not quite true. There were many early Christian writings, and some were included in early Bibles, quoted by church leaders and used for teaching, then later removed or excluded from the canon. This isn't some wild legend. It was used and quoted by early Christians like Clement of Alexandria, Origen, and Jerome, people who had access to early Christian texts we no longer possess in full. But when the canon was formalized, texts like the Gospel of the Hebrews were set aside, not necessarily because they were fake, but because they were local to certain communities, didn't circulate widely enough, or emphasized ideas that didn't line up perfectly with later theological priorities. So what's the story? After the resurrection, according to fragments of the Gospel of the Hebrews, Jesus appeared to his disciples while they were eating. But unlike the canonical Gospels, this account describes his face shining with brilliant light, so radiant that the disciples couldn't look at him directly. In this appearance, a central role is given to James the Just, who in early Christian tradition was understood not just as a follower, but as a leader of the Jerusalem church. James is the one who touches the risen Jesus and believes. Jesus then blesses him with these words, "Bring me those who seek my face and proclaim my name on earth. For these I will be with you always, to save them." Immediately after this blessing, Jesus ascends into heaven. This is significant because it combines resurrection confirmation, divine radiance, blessing, and ascension into one moment, and it places James at the center of the early church's witness. This differs starkly from the canonical accounts, where Peter, Mary Magdalene, or the 11 are more prominent. So why was this removed? Different emphasis. The story places James in a central role, which later church leaders may have seen as upsetting to the developing authority structure centered on the 12 apostles. Local use. It may have been widely used in Jewish Christian communities in places like Egypt or Syria, but not across the whole Christian world. Canon formation. When church leaders met to decide which writings belonged in the New Testament, they valued texts that were widely read, consistent with what we now call orthodoxy, and easily verified across regions. Unfortunately, texts like the Gospel of the Hebrews didn't meet all these criteria. Does this mean it's fake? Not necessarily. We don't have the full text. What remains are fragments preserved in early church writings. But those fragments tell us that early Christians remembered Jesus' resurrection in ways that didn't make it into the four Gospels we have today. If you want to look this up yourself, scholars often point to the writings of Origen and Jerome, who quote the Gospel of the Hebrews in discussing Scripture. You can also find academic collections like the Old Testament pseudepigrapha or the Apocryphal New Testament that gather these fragments and explain their sources. What's exciting about this is that it shows the Bible's history is more complex than most of us learned in Sunday school. There were stories beloved and taught by early Christians that later generations didn't include in the Bible as we know it. And rediscovering them gives us a richer picture of how early followers of Jesus understood his life, death, and resurrection. If you're fascinated by hidden texts and early Christian history, make sure hit that like and subscribe at Yahweh Streets 444, and don't forget to dive into those ancient writings and see what else they reveal about the beginnings of Christianity.